a lot of what President Trump says, he's already said, a lot of the descriptions. I think the most concerning thing was about the nuclear material that is still in Iran, which is the 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium to 60%, which everybody says has been buried and would require a very, very highly specialized, difficult, special forces operation to get. And there seemed to be no indication of that. In fact, the president said that it would take months to get near what he called the nuclear dust. I'm assuming that's what he's talking about, that we will hit them hard if they make a move. We have all the cards and they have none, which other analysts and experts have characterized as pretty much following an Israeli template, which is the so-called mowing the lawn template, i.e. you keep hitting, you keep hitting. It's a constant pattern of being on a war footing. If you hit and degrade, which obviously Iran has been, and then, I don't know, later they pop up again, and then you keep hitting. This is what Israel has been doing for the last decades around its borders. So that was one thing which I thought. The other is about the Straits of Hormuz. It was somewhat complicated. The president basically said, we don't need it. We'd like to help others, but we don't need it. Why don't you buy U.S. oil? And then he repeated what he said before about NATO allies. Why don't you drum up some delayed courage? Just take it. The hard part is done. The rest will be easy. And then he said, but it will open up naturally because Iranians want to sell oil. So it wasn't clear whether there is a further strategic objective of trying to open the Strait of Hormuz, which is what everybody in the region wants, and most particularly the allies, American allies, especially in Asia, are very, very hard hit. A huge number of states of energy emergency have been implemented, and they're really having a tough time, to the point, as some of you have discussed, that some sanctions on Russian oil at sea are being removed, including some sanctions on Iranian oil at sea, to try to relieve the pressure on some of these oil prices. As for Europe, as you know, they do actually use their bases to allow the United States to use them right now in various different degrees, but they don't want to join the offensive part of a war that they were never consulted on. They believe it's a war of choice. They believe there wasn't an imminent threat from Iran, that the negotiations on the 27th of February were going in the right direction, and could have produced perhaps something more important in terms of, keeping the nuclear threat under wraps than this war has introduced yet. If that 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium remains inside of Iran, that will mean one of their strategic objectives, the main strategic objective, has not been accomplished. So was waiting to hear whether there was any plans in that regard, and didn't hear it.
What about what he said about the regime there, where he was talking about who's running Iran right now, something he's described as a new regime that he believes is more effective to be in discussion with. He's cast out on the new supreme leader, who is, of course, the son of the old supreme leader that was killed. Did that stand out to you at all, Christian?
Well, here's the thing. They have said several times that there is a regime change, sort of, by another word, i.e. the regime has changed. It actually hasn't. It's just other layers are coming up that have already been in place. Yes, they have been very successful intelligence successes on finding various leaders. In fact, a lot of leaders, level 1, level 2, have all been decapitated, but more keep coming up. And the most important thing, I think, until we see otherwise, is even nearly 5 weeks into this, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, remains in control, remains able to retaliate in whatever way. It just takes one missile here or there. It just takes one drone here or there to threaten the most important part of this whole equation, which is the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil does travel. So they don't actually need to do a huge amount, but they are doing what they need to do to retaliate and to hold the world hostage in this economic way, including, to an extent, the United States, so not as much of the rest of the world, but with gas prices rising, perhaps with food prices rising, because the chemicals for fertilizer, i.e. for crop growth, are not being able to be exported. That could start to hurt not just the US, but other countries very much. In terms of the Iranians and the Americans right now, it doesn't sound like there are any any progress in negotiations, which we were told might be happening, and certainly key allies are trying to, be mediators, try to figure out how to get there to be some kind of agreement and negotiation to stop this. The president of Iran actually wrote an open letter to the people of the United States today, realizing the communications battle is a lot of it, saying that we're just defending ourselves. We telegraphed this retaliation, and he even said to Trump's essential, as he said, it was my honor to pull out of the nuclear deal. The president of Iran said, that this was, we were committed to our agreement, and then, he said it was delusional to pull out of it because this is where we are right now. So there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of opening right now for negotiations, and we'll wait to see what happens next.
Yeah, particularly over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Christian, great to have your thoughts on this speech tonight.
Nuclear sites that we obliterated with the B-2 bombers have been hit so hard that it would take months to get near the nuclear dust, and we have it under intense satellite surveillance and control. If we see them make a move, even a move for it, we'll hit them with missiles very hard again. We have all the cards, they have none.
That was the president's update just a few moments ago on the status of that enriched uranium in Iran. Of course, something that the president struck those sites just last summer when he argued that they had been totally obliterated. He argued tonight that he thinks this war is nearing completion, as he also threatened to send Iran into the Stone Age should diplomatic talks not work out. CNN's Elena Trine is watching it all from the White House. Elena, obviously White House officials had a point with this speech. Do they believe that they achieved that goal?
Yeah, from my conversations so far, Caitlin, they do. I mean, he did exactly what they wanted him to do, even though really we didn't hear anything new from the president this evening. The point of this was to really try and sell this to the American people. And part of that is, yes, we have heard the president make many of these claims in the past, that the United States is winning this war, that they are close to achieving all of their objectives, that the war is going to end soon. But they had hoped, really, that having that speech and those comments come in the form of an address to the nation meant many Americans would actually be watching. And I'd remind our viewers that this comes at a time when they recognize how much the American public's patience is wearing thin. And so that was really part of this. And he did, I would note as well, largely stick to the script, which is uncharacteristic of him. But again, I think some things that we were watching for that just didn't happen was he did not lay out specifics on when he's expecting to end the war, and said, remind our viewers that this comes at a time when they recognize how much the American public's patience is wearing thin. And so that was really part of this. And he did, I would note as well, largely stick to the script, which is uncharacteristic of him. But again, I think some things that we were watching for that just didn't happen was he did not lay out specifics on when he's expecting to end the war, and said he just said he expected it to be completed soon. He left the Strait of Hormuz question kind of open-ended, repeating this idea that perhaps the United States will end the war even if the strait remains closed. And also he didn't say anything about ground troops, something we know they are heavily considering behind closed doors. And so again, we really didn't learn much from the president from those comments tonight.
Yeah, obviously we've heard the president in his Q&As with reporters. Many people might have been listening for the first time. We'll see what their takeaway of this was. Elena Trine from the White House, thank you. John, obviously a lot of takeaways from that speech there in terms of whether or not it does move the needle as the White House is hoping it will.
Yeah, to an extent, it was a collection of a lot of what he's been saying in social media posts over the last few days. With us now, former Obama administration official Van Jones, Iran expert Kareem Sajapur, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, and former JAG officer Margaret Donovan. And there was a bit of an, inherent contradiction in saying that the objectives are very nearly complete. It's almost over, but we're going to attack Iran into the Stone Age over the next few weeks. And if you want a sense of how the reaction is being felt around the world, I've been watching oil prices, both Brent crude and West Texas, up 3 to 4% in just the last hour while the president's been speaking.
Yeah, that's a significant change, John, in terms of rising prices. And what that indicates to me is that the markets aren't really buying what the president is saying. And with the statement that he made that we're looking at 2 to 3 more weeks that will be hitting them hard, quote unquote, that is really, I think, what is making the oil markets nervous. And that's going to, I think, there'll be some costs associated with that, both in terms of popular support potentially, as well as mission costs for the military, as the military basically flexes its muscles to go and move into certain areas. He didn't say which areas. He never talked about Karg Island. He didn't talk really about the Strait of Hormuz, but it is something that we really need to look at.
Green?
For me, John, tonight was a reminder that the most important deliberations that have been happening over the last month are not between America and Iran, but between President Trump and himself. And you know, tonight was oftentimes hour by hour, he can go from threatening escalation to the prospect of diplomacy and a deal. And I think tonight he was very much in escalation mode. I think there was two very nervous audiences tonight. There was members of the American public who are worried about American service members being sent into harm's way. He didn't give any indication that that would be the case. But a lot of nervous partners in the Middle East tonight worried that he was simply going to declare victory and exit the war. He didn't do that either. So he was able to thread that needle. But when he said that we're going to continue with the mission, to complete the mission, it's still not clear what that mission is.
Look, I think Trump is on course to get a thank you card from the Ayatollahs this year. This speech was a disaster. It started off good because he was, tough on the Iranian regime. He was explaining why they were bad. But the three things Americans are looking for from this president, it was 3 strikes and you're out. First of all, regime change, which is something that has been on the table. He just fudges it and says, well, we have it, because we went from an old Ayatollah to a young Ayatollah with the same name. That's not regime change. You lose credibility when you play little word games like that. Number 2, the nuclear materials. He says, we're not going to go get it. We're just going to surveil it from the satellite. We were doing that before. Yeah. You don't need a war to do that. So why are we doing a war to do something we were already doing? And then number 3, the Strait. They've got a chokehold on the entire world economy. And rather than him saying that they're going to have to give that up, he goes, it's just going to magically open up. And by the way, I guess the Swedish people and the Indians should just go over there and grab it. That is ludicrous. So whether you're talking about the nuclear materials, regime change, or the Strait, this president just swish, 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 3 strikes, and we are in a worse position now than we were before the war started.
Margaret?
And by the way, just days ago, he was threatening to take out civilian infrastructure if the Strait wasn't open. So that's how important it was to the president just days ago. So how are we to divine what is and isn't going to be important tomorrow? My biggest takeaway from that was that we weren't informed of any plans. We don't know what the future plans hold. We don't know about ground troops. We don't know about future airstrikes. We don't even know what a deal would look like. He just kept referencing the deal. And I thought that it was notable that he compared, towards the end of his speech there, he compared what's going on in Iran to World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. All of those, with the exception of Korea, which was sort of a nuanced international authority that Truman relied on, all of those began or were conducted with congressional authorization. And so, for whatever reason, the Bush administration was able to go to Congress after 9/11, but he couldn't go to Congress here. So my biggest takeaway here was that this is an unaccountable executive not working through the people's elected representatives.
And each of those examples include the word war.
Yes.
Notably. All right, thank you all for being here and watching this with us, trying to understand what we heard and what it means going forward.
Breaking news tonight, the war with Iran is, quote, nearing completion, according to President Trump. Just moments ago, he delivered his first major national address on the war, and he assured Americans that everything is going as planned.
Tonight, I'm pleased to say that these core strategic objectives are nearing completion. We've done all of it. Their Navy is gone. Their Air Force is gone. Their missiles are just about used up or beaten. Taken together, these actions will cripple Iran military, crush their ability to support terrorist proxies, and deny them the ability to build a nuclear bomb. Our armed forces have been extraordinary.
Now, Trump says that the 2 to 3 week timeline that he set earlier this week still holds, and he downplayed the length of the war so far. He compared it to how long the U.S. was involved in other wars, like World War I and World War II, as well as Iraq and Afghanistan. And he again went after allies for not helping the efforts to secure the Strait of Hormuz.
To those countries that can't get fuel, many of which refuse to get involved in the decapitation of Iran, we had to do it ourselves. I have a suggestion. Number 1, buy oil from the United States of America. We have plenty. We have so much. And number two, build up some delayed courage. Should have done it before, should have done it with us, as we asked. Go to the strait and just take it, protect it, use it for yourselves.
If you were looking for some new insights from the president about how this war is going, where it's headed, how exactly it might end, I'm not sure that you got it today. The president basically repeated a lot of the things that he's been saying in Truth Social posts, except he said it out loud.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of the big surprise of this speech. Everyone was waiting for some sort of moment. We didn't see it. But it's sort of very much like the Trump doctrine: escalate fast, exit faster, and then declare victory. And I think that's what he did tonight in the speech.
Peter?
I was expecting something significant if there was something significant to announce. I think the fact that, well, what do we see teased over the past couple of days? It was threatening to pull out of NATO. It was threatening ground operations, whether to secure the highly enriched uranium or to seize Karg Island. We have a Marine Expeditionary Unit in that area. The fact that he didn't mention that doesn't mean that was never on the table. It means that, frankly, this is one of the first addresses he's had since February 28th directed to the American people, which means all the other conversations were happening in the background. I think the fact that this was kind of a nothing burger is a bit of a testament to the fact that this is not a war, this is not a diplomatic effort that's playing out on our screens. It's ones that are happening behind the scenes with conversations with the principals in Islamabad between the Pakistani mediators, American and Iranian officials, and in other channels.
But I mean, no insights into that either? No sense of what kind of relationship he's looking for, what kind of deal he'd like to, how he would like the Iranian people to behave, the Iranian leadership, excuse me, to behave after all is said and done. I think that was the other part that, to me, was missing. It's just this picture of what does a post-war Iran even look like and its relationship with the United States.
Yeah, Abby, this feels like the kind of speech that President Trump should have been delivering a month ago. This is explaining why he's going to war. But that's not what the American people and the people of the world want to hear now. They don't want to hear why he went to war. They want to hear how he's going to end the war, how he's going to get out of the war, what is his exit strategy. And he didn't have an exit strategy. He just talked about claiming that Iran has been completely decimated, but nevertheless, he's going to continue the war for 2 to 3 weeks. And he suggested nothing about how he's going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil is trapped. And he said nothing about how he's going to secure nearly 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium that Iran still has in its possession, much less his original goal of overthrowing the regime, which clearly is not happening. So yes, he's done some things, and he was bragging about all the decimation he's inflicted on the Iranian armed forces. That's all true, but the other objectives have not been achieved, and his war of choice has caused a global energy crisis, and he doesn't seem to know how to get out of it, aside from trying to threaten our allies and get them to bail him out. But if the U.S. Navy is not going to go in the Strait of Hormuz, and they're not right now, you're not going to find any allies who are going to go where the U.S. Navy will not go.
Right. Well, if we're not going to do it, who will? Right. But on the nuclear piece, let me play what he said. He's talking about Operation Midnight Hammer and what happened to Iran's nuclear material that Max just referenced. Here's what he said.
In June, I ordered a strike on Iran's key nuclear facilities, an Operation Midnight Hammer. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Those beautiful B-2 bombers performed magnificently. We totally obliterated those nuclear sites. The regime then sought to rebuild their nuclear program at a totally different location, making clear they had no intention of abandoning their pursuit of nuclear weapons.
So he said that, but let me just remind you that about 2 weeks ago, Tulsi Gabbard testified under oath to Congress. As a result of Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated. There have been no efforts since then to rebuild their enrichment capability. The entrances to the underground facilities that were bombed have been buried and shuttered with cement. So Tulsi Gabbard is under oath. The president is giving a speech at the White House. But I think it's an open question how truthful he was being about that particular statement. And it's important because the nuclear material is still in Iran. Mm-hmm. it is still in Iran, and we've done nothing to get it out.
If the goal of the war is to stop Iran from developing nukes, then we have no way to actually verify if they have enriched uranium. If the goal of the war is to defang their ability to fund proxies in the Middle East, they are now more rich because they're tolling people through the Strait of Hormuz, and that is making them a lot of money. We've created an environment where Iran is gaining money due to the sanctions lifted on oil. Iran is gaining money because they're going to start tolling ships. And on top of that, this administration is not just changing objectives every single day, they're lowering the threshold for what victory is considered as. So first it was regime change, as you said. Israel named this Operation Roaring Lion, which indicates the return of the Shah. It's regime change. Then they realized that's a really hard task. We're going to just talk about weapons of mass destruction now. That one kind of works sometimes. And they realized, okay, we have no way to actually verify that as well. So now we're in a situation where people on TV are listing off, oh, we've destroyed their Air Force. We've destroyed their Navy. Their Air Force was gifted to them 55 years ago by the United States. So was the Navy. Their Air Force and their Navy were not significant threats to the United States. They were ancient. They were ancient as hell. They were old. So what have we gotten from this? We've destroyed their ancient fleets. We haven't actually secured the enriched uranium, and they're richer for it. They have control over the Strait of Hormuz and can continue to exert control over the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not seeing the victory here.
Why can't Trump get his story straight about the nukes? That's so central to this whole thing. The administration is saying all kinds of different things about it and not leveling with the American people.
Well, I saw the president's remarks, and I see what you said, Tulsi said. My understanding of how they positioned it was that the bombing we did last summer was at a specific location, but the president's remarks tonight, I interpreted as they were trying to rebuild, or at least in the early stages of attempting to rebuild in a different location.
Well, that would contradict what Tulsi Gabbard said.
Well, I think what she said was that at the sites we bombed, those were shuttered, but maybe they were trying to rebuild.
I mean, the exact words are, there has been no efforts since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. So she's not talking about the sites. She's talking about their enrichment capability.
Okay, well,
so
I heard the president tonight say that our belief is that we bombed them, they tried to rebuild, and then of course we know they told our negotiators that they had enough enriched uranium to build 11 nuclear bombs. So that is the data set that he was working off of when he made the decision. I also heard him say tonight that we're planning to do, at least initially, satellite monitoring on the nuclear material at the moment because it's buried. And so if they make a move towards it, we'll be able to know that. Now, I think what went unsaid tonight, but what I assume is happening in the background in these diplomatic conversations, is that part of the way this is going to end is hostilities will cease at some point. We'll have some kind of diplomatic end that has to include getting the nuclear material. He didn't say that tonight. I hope that would be a great scenario if it works out that way.
He didn't say that.
And he also didn't say.
I mean, he did not say that, and it's more than just that he didn't say that. He actually proposed an alternative, which you just pointed out, which is that we would just perpetually surveil and bomb them if they ever attempted to get the nuclear material that is still in their territory. Christiane Amanpour was on earlier tonight. It's talking about this. It's called a mow the lawn scenario. That's great for Israel because they're right there. But for us, are we really going to just perpetually be poised to bomb Iran until the end of time?
I mean, at this point, you have the Saudis and the Emiratis wanting to enter into this conflict, proposing resolutions at the UN Security Council to reopen the Strait of Hormuz through the United Nations. So this is not just us going it alone. I mean, that monitoring is relatively easy. We don't even need to be there. You can have the B-2s flying from Missouri all the way across the pond with some KC-135s refueling them and mow that lawn relatively simply. I think this is the challenge that I don't get about the black pill of the folks who just think that this is all doom and gloom. I mean, when you were talking earlier, it's like the U.S. is losing. We could end it any
I never said we're losing. I just said there's a cost-benefit analysis to happen here, and I see the cost as so high, and the benefit is we destroyed some 55-year-old Air Force. Like what's the benefit here?
Thousands of ballistic missiles.
Wait, if the thousands of ballistic missiles have been, if we have won so decisively, why can't we get a single ship through the Strait of Hormuz? Why won't we even try to escort a ship through the Strait of Hormuz?
What tonight was about, ultimately, what really the president was trying to do tonight is to not box himself in, to try and declare a victory with a slow exit at some point. He is reading the polling right now. He may control the battlefield out in the Middle East. He is losing the living rooms across America. You look at polling, more than half of Americans do not believe they are benefiting financially because of this war. You look at Republicans and Democrats, They don't want this war. They want to get out of it as soon as possible. And when foreign policy is the thing over here, and suddenly you see it showing up in your grocery bill, in your airline fees, and then also, at home in the typical costs for home folks, they start to feel that. And when you feel it at the gas pump, it becomes a real issue for Americans.
And by the way, Avi, if I could just mention one thing, which I did not hear in his speech. Remember, he set a deadline of this Monday telling Iran they had to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or he would bomb Iran's electrical plants. That was a deadline that he had moved once before. Now he set it for Monday. It went completely unmentioned here, which suggests maybe it's kind of disappeared down the memory hole, and it's not really a deadline.
It's a good point. I mean, what is the status of that deadline?
I think,
and that threat?
I think he didn't make much mention of this tonight, and he obviously didn't want to get into the details. He did talk about it at the Easter lunch today. Obviously, there are conversations going on between our government through the Pakistanis and other countries to try to bring this to a diplomatic end. And I don't think he was in a position tonight to unroll all of that sensitive conversation. But it is apparent that conversations are taking place. So if we've set deadlines or made threats about attacking certain infrastructure, I mean, it's a pretty delicate dance we're doing. But at the end of this, if you do wind up with a diplomatic end, you have decimated all of their military capabilities. You do wind up in a situation where you can, at a minimum, monitor the nuclear material and at a maximum go in and get it. This ultimately is a good outcome for the region. It's a good outcome for the world to defang and de-nuke the world's largest supporter of terrorism.
It's only a good outcome if the Strait of Hormuz is open, because remember, the Strait of Hormuz was open before Trump launched his war. So if the war winds up with Iran with a chokehold on 20% of the world's oil, that is not in any way a victory for the United States. That's actually a massive setback.
It's a massive defeat for China, too. I mean, that's the reality. Like we always think we're at the center of things in a lot of ways that we are, but when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, the amount of energy the U.S. is getting from that is negligible. It's in the low double digits. Our natural gas costs
our gas at the pump has gone up over $4 a gallon because of the energy prices.
Yes. We're still below where we were when Russia invaded Ukraine.
It's a full dollar. Yes. Look, the American people, one of the interesting things is that it's not just that the war is unpopular. The war is becoming increasingly unpopular. At the start of the war, it's 59% who disapproved. Now it's 66%. And when you look at the support for some of these other conflicts that we've been engaged in over the last 100 years or so, this is one of the most unpopular that we've ever been a part of. And that's saying a lot, considering that it's very clear that Americans understand the threat that Iran poses. They're just very clear-eyed that they don't like how this is going. They don't like how the war is being conducted. They don't like what it means for their pocketbooks. And that does matter in this democracy.
Yeah, Donald Trump had a very good chance tonight to explain his rationale to the American people and lay out what we've gotten. But again, every single weapon system that was actually a threat to us is still intact. You just gloated that we took out thousands of their missiles. Okay, so I keep hearing this line. We've taken out their missiles.
We don't have a Navy
We've
anymore.
Their Navy and Air Force was 55 years old. What is taking?
Then why was it harassing people in the
What does taking out a 55-year-old Navy mean?
They were constantly harassing ships in the Gulf.
They're still harassing.
They don't have any ships left.
No, I'm saying, my point is that the main thing that we care about, which is the Strait of Hormuz, which is the global oil supply, they are still, as Trump said, Trump made this point himself, it doesn't take a lot to terrorize ships in that strait, and they are currently doing it right now.
And if you look at launchings of Iranian drones and missiles, it went down dramatically at the beginning of the war, but it's actually been pretty steady for the last several weeks. They're still able to launch a bunch of drones and missiles every day, and that's all it takes to prevent ships from going through the Strait of Hormuz.
Can I say, I've asked conservatives time and time again, if we've won so decisively, why can't we open the strait? And they can't give a sufficient answer. The real answer is because Iran has two separate navies. They have their conventional navy, which we've destroyed. Then they have the IRGC Navy, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. That one is the one that wages asymmetric warfare. And I guess I'll just say one more time, if we've really taken out both of their navies and won so decisively, how come gas prices are very likely to spike another, 20, 30 cents?
I know. After a month of NATO allies rebuffing President Trump's calls to help with the war in Iran, he is again threatening to leave the alliance. In an interview with The Telegraph, he was asked about whether the U.S. could withdraw from NATO, and he said, "Oh yes, I would say beyond reconsideration." He also called NATO a, quote, paper tiger, and added that Putin knows that too. Part of his anger is because European allies, as we were just discussing, have so far said no to sending their navies to go into the Strait of Hormuz. Some of them have said no to allowing the United States to launch attacks from their territories, which is a pretty significant no. And as we were talking before the break, I think we have the oil futures or the gas prices right now and the Dow futures right now. Gas prices are up. It was about 4% when I looked at it earlier, still 4%, a crude oil and Brent crude. The markets are basically saying, yeah, we don't really think that this thing is going to get resolved anytime soon.
No, I do just have to remark, looking at those oil numbers, and the president said this several times, and it's hard to disaggregate what he's saying that is hyperbolic, what he's saying that is sincere. When he says we expected it to be way worse than this, I entirely believe him. The fact that oil is trading around 100 with the Strait of Hormuz being closed now for 4 weeks is insane. This is so much less dramatic than I think the expectation was. And it reminds me of the concerns about what Hezbollah would do against Israel if there was significant action, the tens of thousands of rockets that would rain down, and Israel was able to neutralize that threat without that doom and gloom. We were talking earlier about the popularity, about the polling, and that's something that strikes me is we have seen in the past 4 weeks one of the most significant tactical military achievements since the Gulf War. I mean, just a incredible show of strength and of force. I'm talking about the initial one, the happy one that we like to talk about in '91, right? The shock and awe that brought back the American sense of pride in the wake of Vietnam and the defeat there. The fact that the American people are not supporting it has very little to do with what's happened. It has everything to do with the fact that it is trailing in the polling to Donald Trump's approval rating, as is the operation in Venezuela. The operation in Venezuela is 30 points more popular in Venezuela than in the United States.
So wait, so what are you suggesting?
I'm saying that Donald Trump, and he's
you
joking.
think this is a Trump thing? That's because Trump is so unpopular?
I think that if there was capitulation from day one and Trump was getting a parade down the Grand Boulevard in Tehran, he would still be sitting at the similar approval rating because opinions are so.
Don't you think Americans are rational about paying $1 more
I've seen very little
gallon
rationality
of gas?
in the
I mean,
public's view of
that
Donald
seems
Trump.
actually quite rational. I don't share your skepticism of the American people. I think they understand when they don't think that this. I think they are saying very clearly they do not think that this step needed to be taken. And that's actually Trump's own fault because he told them a year ago that he had already done the job. He had already neutralized the nuclear program. So then for him to come back and say, well, we need to wage a war, that seems like a bait and switch. I think Americans are rationally saying, what on earth is that about?
Well, over in Europe, you heard Christine Lagarde already say last week, you're going to see the reverberations of this war. Everybody watches that oil number. It's not just that number to watch. I was just after the speech talking to somebody who's very brilliant on financial markets. And they said to me, Rena, you're going to see the shocks continue from fertilizer to Africa to Asia to Europe. And Europe understands that. But they also did hear Trump loud and clear. They've already made moves on defense. They're creating their own defense ecosystem because Trump has made it clear that they don't know that they can rely on him at this point.
And they're doing what he wanted, which was getting closer to that 5% of GDP for defense spending.
But this war has serious repercussions.
Very much
just
so.
the price of oil is not the only indicator for us to know.
100% and not reverberations of the supply chain.
One of the major repercussions of this war is it's turned not only into an energy crisis, it's turned into a transatlantic crisis that's threatening the future of NATO, which was already very much in doubt after Trump threatened to annex Greenland. And that really caused massive shock in Europe and loss of faith in the United States. And now that loss of faith is increasing because Trump did not consult with the Europeans before going into Iran. But now he's browbeating and threatening the Europeans to say, you have to come in and take care of our mess. And they're saying, this is not our war. This is not what NATO was all about, because NATO is about self-defense and it's about collective defense if the territory of the NATO countries is attacked. But it wasn't attacked. This is Trump going out and starting another war and trying to drag the Europeans in. And so and now Trump is threatening to pull out of NATO if the Europeans don't come in and help him out. So this is causing a major crisis within the most successful alliance in military history. That's very, very alarming. And the only beneficiary is going to be Vladimir Putin. And by the way, Trump has nothing to say about the fact that Putin is helping Iran to target Americans.
And when Trump says NATO is a paper tiger, Putin's like, Music to my ears.
I just wish the
he
Europeans
loves
would
to
challenge him on that
loves
and
to
show
hear
they're
it.
not a paper tiger.
Can I just
Boost
point
those
out,
defense spending.
there's a fact that I learned the other day that I think is very interesting. When NATO was being negotiated in about 1948, the United States, specifically us, we asked for a new clause, Article 6. That limited the geography of the defense. So the geography of NATO's defense is limited to Europe and the United States. So this is not even a task that, number one, is in NATO. Number two, as you said, it's a defensive alliance. Also, I just want to read off, I think it's worth reading off some of the quotes we've gotten from Trump. In January of 2026, he said, "It may be a choice between preserving NATO or seizing Greenland." He refused to rule out the use of military force. He also threatened, he actually threatened to impose a 25% import tax on all of the European Union if they didn't just give us Greenland.
Why was he concerned about Greenland? He was concerned because he was unsure whether or not the Europeans could be relied upon in a difficult moment where they were putting the squeeze to.
When is the only
on whether
time
or not
Article
we could
5 has
use
been
that.
invoked?
Yes, it was post 9/11.
And who are they helping? Us.
And
So they
now
are
you know,
reliable.
you're talking about the geographic constraints. You know what is within the geographic constraint is Ukraine. We bore a lot of that heavy lifting. Now we're working with NATO.
Hang on a second. So
They're
are you
suffering
suggesting
closure of the Strait of
that
Hormuz.
Trump was threatening to attack Greenland because he was worried that the United States or that Europe wasn't going to hold up its end of the NATO bargain? I'm not sure I'm following that argument.
Let's blow up NATO to save NATO.
No, the argument for why we needed to expand our facilities in Greenland was that the Danes were unwilling to expand on the current terms of our
that is
defense
actually
agreement.
totally
yes, in
not.
2004,
That
the
is not.
Igualuku
No.
Amendment
Th-
to
that
the
is
original defense
I'm
agreement.
sorry, Peter. That is
hemmed it in.
revisionist. That is revisionist.
In what
Trump
sense, please?
never once, this is in the reporting, he never once brought up expanding our military engagement in Greenland with the Danes in private, despite all of the public things that they were saying. It never came up once.
In 2019,
And that-
Carla
no,
Sands, the
hold on.
ambassador to Denmark,
Hold on
did
a
bring
second.
that up, and it caused a
Trump
massive rift.
never, his administration never brought it up in conversations with the Danes. Okay? And then on top of that, he could have asked for what? Let's just talk about expanding the base, that you have an existing treaty that allows you to do that. And Trump said, okay, yeah, I'm going to back down on the threats. Why would he do that if he could have just had the conversation in the first place? Trump wants
They had shut
Greenland.
down these conversations in 2019.
Trump wants Greenland because he believed there were critical minerals in there. He claimed falsely that the Chinese and the Russians were already trying to get onto Greenland. That is not true. Okay, there's an Arctic threat, but it's not true that they are there, that they're trying to get into Greenland. So Trump created the Greenland problem. He could have asked the Danes to expand the bases. He didn't. He did not ask them to do it. And then he threatened them. And then when he was forced to back down, he then took the option that was always on the table. That's why on Wall Street they call it the taco trade, because he is backing down every time. And that's exactly what happened here.
You know why NATO should care about this? It was just a couple of weeks ago that we learned that Iran has ballistic missile capabilities that can reach most of Europe. On top of that, does no one else here find it agitating that we spend billions and trillions of dollars over decades? We have U.S. troops stationed in all these bases with all these allies. And then when we decide that we need to do something that is in our national security interest, you have supposed friends of the United States saying, you can't use these bases. We're not going to permit this. We're not going to help you on that. It is agitating.
Don't they have a say?
It is agitating. But bottom line,
but doesn't NATO have a say
why
in
doesn't
how
Europe,
to deal
why
with
doesn't
the
Europe
threat?
look at this ballistic missile
But hold
threat
on, Scott,
a little more seriously?
How
That's what I
doesn't NATO? Don't you think NATO ought to have a say? European countries ought to have a say in how you address that threat. I'm not disagreeing with you about the threat, but shouldn't they be consulted? Aren't they not right to wonder why weren't they consulted before Trump decided to wage a war? It sounds like you think it's in their defense.
Well, it is.
Shouldn't they have been consulted?
It is in the defense of all of Europe now that
Shouldn't they have been
see that the
consulted?
ballistic missile threat
But
is
Scott,
real. No one
should they
can
have
deny
been-
that.
Should they have been consulted?
Consulted? I mean, look, we decided it was in our national security interest.
Oh, okay.
Why they don't understand that it is in theirs is beyond me, and I think that's what leads to the president's agitation with them.
If
They're
it's
too
about
stupid
our
to
national
realize
security
that they're under
interests,
threat.
that makes sense, right? But if it's in theirs, they should be consulted. If this war is about Europe's security, shouldn't Europe be consulted?
It's about our national security. But along the way here, what we've all learned is that Europe is under threat.
If
and
this
my
is about us,
and my point is,
if this is about us,
why
this
are
is
they
our
too dumb to
war.
realize that these ballistic missiles can reach most of Europe's capitals?
I thought the missiles were
It's
gone.
silly.
You just said this was our national security interest.
It is our national security
Okay,
interest.
so then why is the onus on Europe to clean up our mess?
The onus is on Europe to defend themselves, and the onus is on the President of the United States to defend the national security of the United States.
You're not
But we're
asking
all
Europe to
but
defend
Western
itself.
civilization is in this together, and these fanatics have missiles that can strike most of Europe,
See,
and they have
I
nuclear
think this is a
material as well.
disagreement about what
It's pretty
alliances
obvious.
are. I mean, if we are really in this together, which is, I think you're right, that's what it's supposed to be. Shouldn't there be mutual trust? Shouldn't there be mutual consultation? Shouldn't there be an agreement, an alliance, a coalition that was formed beforehand, not after the fact?
Yeah, and I think that trust has really been broken in this by the Trump's attempts to seize Greenland, and now in this current crisis, the Europeans have no faith in the United States anymore. And in the future, if Trump wants support, he should ask for it in advance, not just from the Europeans, but from the American people. He made no attempt to rally the American public. He made no attempt to win congressional support because he thought this would be a short and fast war and the Iranians would capitulate after he killed the supreme leader. That clearly hasn't happened, and he doesn't know what to do next. So he's kind of floundering around looking for a way out. And in the past, he could just back down in whatever trade war, whatever he had started, and everything would be okay. But in this case, he can't back out of it because the Iranians won't let him. He doesn't, and the Iranians in many ways have the upper hand because they have a chokehold on 20% of the world's oil, and Trump doesn't know how to break,
Max,
their
flying
stranglehold.
B-2 bombers and refueling them over Iranian
We're not
airspace,
moving
and
any
they
ships
have
to the Strait of
and they
Hormuz,
have
Scott.
the upper
We're not
hand?
moving any
That
ships
is
to the Strait of
asinine.
Hormuz.
I think both things can be true at the same time, that Iran's goals can be different from the United States', and it can involve keeping us there for much longer than we'd like to be there. And even while we have tactical control over Iranian territory, they're
winning.
They,
Don't worry.
Well, no,
We have
listen,
control of their entire airspace.
they still
Don't
have.
worry,
I
it's
mean,
all going
Scott, I think
well.
you would agree. They still have a vote in this to some extent.
Of
And they're
course.
voting
They
tonight.
are.
It's Passover in Israel, and tonight there are people inside
Bombs raining down
underneath
on
the shopping
Israel
centers
right
in
now.
Israel in tents on the first night of Passover because the bombs are still coming. It's not just
At a much
Israel,
lower rate.
it's United Arab Emirates, it's Saudi Arabia, it's our U.S. bases in the Middle East have been hit. So we can't say
I
that
agree
this
with you.
war is without a price tag.
Oh, yeah.
We
Of
went
course it
in,
is. All
the
war
United
has a
States
price.
and
All war
Israel
has a
went
risk.
in, and now the whole world has got the check and will pay the price.
All right, we got to leave it there, Peter.
Iran posed.
All right. President Trump's national address to the American public about the war with Iran. It was a full sell to the American people that the president used his time mostly to justify why the United States began the conflict in the first place. He signaled that the U.S. is prepared to hit Iran hard in the coming weeks.
We are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Trump also repeated his warnings about Iran's stockpile of ballistic missiles as he sought to explain the war to the American public.
They were also rapidly building a vast stockpile of conventional ballistic missiles and would soon have had missiles that could reach the American homeland, Europe, and virtually any other place on Earth. Iran's strategy was so obvious. They wanted to produce as many missiles as possible, and they did.
Trump has previously offered similar assessments, but sources have told CNN that there is no intelligence suggesting that Iran is pursuing a missile program targeting the United States. And these long-range missiles that he's warning about were much farther into the future than he let on. It is an important question about actually the truthfulness of a lot of what he said there. He talked about the ballistic missile threat. He talked about the nuclear threat. He claimed that they were trying to rebuild, which contradicts what his own administration has said about that in recent months. So do the American people have more clarity or less tonight?
I think they have a lot less. And I think, you know, what we saw, the minor ticks on what was happening with oil suggests that the markets think we have less. I think we'll see more of what is happening with the American people when the initial polling comes out about this. But, you know, I think he has this problem of mixing in obvious problems, falsehoods in with what he could have said, which part of it, when he started off smartly on the speech, was these are the things that we have destroyed. These are incontrovertible facts. There's no military greater than the U.S. military. That's smart. Mixing in all of the numbers that nobody can verify, we went from him saying on February 28th that there were 32,000 protesters killed. Tonight, that number jumped by 13,000 people to 45,000 protesters killed. When were these protesters killed? The other 13,000? No one has any reference for that. This idea of talking about what Obama did not do with the Iran deal that he had, well, in fact, what he left out of that was that that deal was multinational, including also Russia and China. It had inspectors, and they were able to get out 97% of Iran's nuclear stockpiles with that deal. Tonight, he's basically saying, this stuff is buried under rubble. We're not going to even touch it. Obama got 97% of it out. We're going to leave it all within their reach. It's kind of insane what he's saying.
Well, if I might, he said that it's buried deep because we've destroyed this area on top of it, and we're monitoring it with satellites. And if they try to go anywhere near it, we'll bomb those people. I mean, we have a military expert here who can explain this maybe a little better. But what I understood is that at this moment, we basically have air superiority over Iran, and there's surveillance to see if they're doing anything with the material that's left. Those are two good things, no?
Yeah, I mean, so if I'm going through the military objectives that he laid out, if we're just going to objectively look at what he had stated, the Iranians about a month beforehand had said, hey, we're not looking to pursue longer-range ballistic missiles. They then went and attacked Diego Garcia with 2, which was twice the distance of the known capabilities they had previously. So they were trying to extend the missiles. The time frame for when they would get to an intercontinental ballistic missile hit the United States is unclear, and nobody's really laid that out from an intelligence perspective, so we'll have to just take that for what it's worth at the moment. This was a missile math game, so the Israelis did say that 6 months after the start of this operation, they would have had to initiate something because the Iranians were building something like 300 ballistic missiles a month. They were thought to have between 2,000 and 3,000 medium-range missiles, and that's the ones that were launched basically at Israel, and then 6,000 to 8,000 short-range are the stuff that they're launching at their neighbors, that's all the Arab states that are around them. And those have now been struck as well as the launchers going after them. So anyway, if you take all those numbers and put them together and the ability to intercept them, we were basically 6 months out from when a strike would have had to happen because somebody would have had to do something, the U.S. or Israel, or wouldn't have been able to defend against it. Then you take the nuke problem set. This is where it's a little less clear. They were about 2 weeks away from having enough fuel for about 11 weapons if they had 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium from 60% to 90% if they still had all of the centrifuge technology. So as the president said, now we've moved from that to we're going to have a persistence there. And now there's been some leaks in the press that the operation, if we had to go get it, would be pretty substantive. So I think there's been an evolution in the mission set where I think the president was briefed, basically, is what I'm reading the tea leaves. This is probably a little bit more he wants to do. Could this be deception covering a potential operation in the future? Does he not want to do it?
You're saying it's more than he wants to do?
I think so.
To go in and actually get it. So he's just going to leave it and we're just going to continue.
Because I think he used the phrase boots on the ground tonight, but he did talk about the satellite survey. I thought that was noteworthy.
Well, of course. I mean, well, look, I mean, the satellites are it is noteworthy for exactly the reason that you're pointing out, because what it really means is that we're committing to a long-term commitment of essentially bombing Iran forever if they ever try to get this material. And I think that is important for the American people to understand. We're not taking it off the table. We're just saying that we're going to continuously have to deal with it forever, which seems to be kind of where we were before.
Well, I think we're definitely in a different position than where we were before. To Alex's point, to Scott's point, their Air Force is not capable of defending Iran's homeland, so to speak. The United States and Israel has done a good job with that. I do think President Trump tonight was very methodological. He was trying to make a point that this is not going to be a forever war. I think that's the reason you saw him reference World War I, World War II, the Korean War. I think he was trying to reassure Americans who are concerned that this can turn into something prolonged, that this is not his goal. His goal is to ideally get in and out. And he told us originally that the time frame was 4 to 6 weeks. We're at the, 4.5 week mark now. So if this operation does conclude in 2 to 3 weeks, like he said it would, that would just be a week or so out of his initial time frame, which I think for President Trump would be a success both militarily, that we got in and out within 6 to 7 weeks, and also that he can say, look, I told you we were going in for this, XYZ. I told you we were getting out here. I pretty much met all of those goals, just as I said. And I think that might be a way for him to kind of reassure Americans and hopefully win back some, voters for the midterms.
The idea that he was reassuring Americans that this won't be a forever war was contradicted by what we were just talking about. They're setting up perpetual oversight in the air so they can perpetually see what Iran is doing, and there's a chance we might have to perpetually strike them over and over, just like we did 8 or 9 months ago, just like we did again. And if we don't actually get the enriched uranium, this will turn into a military treadmill where every 8 months or so, we're continuing to strike them over and over. And I want to make this point again, the main weapon system that were actually a threat to us are still intact. You obviously know better than I do, but their Navy was gifted to them 55 years ago. It's ancient. Their Air Force was gifted to them 55 years ago. It's ancient. Their Air Force could have laps run around it by like one of our planes. So I see people at this table or on TV sitting here and trying to pull all these examples of how we've won. Oh, we destroyed their Air Force. We destroyed their Navy. This isn't a substantive win in any meaningful way. We destroyed an ancient Air Force. We killed an 86-year-old supreme leader who had cancer and replaced him with a 30-year younger son who is more extreme, more radical. They're purging the moderates right there. I think that Iran's thought process right now is, you know what, we need to back off of nukes, no more nukes. Iran's thought process is we need to accelerate. We need to at some point get nukes and stop this from happening.
Let me play,
Do you
this
agree?
is a reaction
Do
just
you agree with
moments
his
ago.
military assessments?
I think the two pieces that are not completely clear yet, just in the objectives that are left, there's about 3,000 targets left. So we've struck 13,000 targets. The CENTCOM commander says there's 3,000 left over the next 2 to 3 weeks. What that encompassed would be the remainder of the industrial base associated with the missiles and the drones. The missiles, I think we can really get to. I think the problem in the long range is going to be the drones, because you only need a couple of those to be able to strike ships. So that's going to be a perpetual problem from an asymmetric standpoint for shutting down or keeping the straits held at risk if they choose to in the future afterwards, if they're not able to get everything else. And then to your point about the nuclear piece, it is a persistent, perpetual stare afterwards if the highly enriched uranium doesn't come out of there, which will require persistent monitoring. The alternative to that would be a very large ground operation with a very significant risk to U.S. forces. That facility where most of it is stored is 300 miles inland, completely surrounded by mountains, 15 kilometers outside the third largest city in the country. That would require probably a large blocking force, somebody going inside to get it. And I think there's a trade-off basically between the risk to U.S. forces and having to actually do that.
Let me add a third scenario. I mean, there is a third option, which is diplomacy, which has always been
absolutely
an option. And that's actually one of the things that Trump said very little about today. He didn't seem to have a whole lot to say about what kind of diplomatic outcome. And I just want to play, this is just coming in, the Prime Minister of Australia responding to what Trump said today and basically saying he also has a lot of questions.
Despite its indiscriminate attacks across the region, Iran's air force is degraded. Its navy is degraded. Its military industrial base is degraded and